evening, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Cambodia Global Dialogue of Southeast Asia TV. Tonight's theme is about Cambodia and trade, but more specifically on aid for trade, technical assistance to help Cambodia develop our trade sector. And we have the pleasure to have with us today a fellow professional from Geneva, and that's why I could not invite him to come to our studio. We had a workshop a few days ago on the review of aid for trade, the effectiveness of aid, and we also have an opportunity to also look the right sector from the perspective of aid for trade. Welcome, Christophe. Christopher Bellmann is the program director of an organization based in Geneva called the ICTSD, International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. Correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well, Christophe, why don't I let you have a few minutes to share a bit about your background and your organization, what you're doing and what your organization is doing.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you. I personally was trained as a specialist in international relations. Worked a number of years for the UN in Latin America, and then went back to Switzerland working with civil society on trade issues. At a time when the WTO was created, around 1994, 95.
Wow.
And at that time, there was this feeling that this WTO was a new animal, that in fact the nature of the agreements coming out of the Uruguay round were very different from the previous rounds of trade negotiations. And that there was a need for, a new organization that could help people understand a little bit what are, the sustainable development implications of these new agreements. Remember, we're in 94, 95. This is shortly after the Rio conference.
Exactly.
In 92, where this concept of sustainable development comes out. And at that time, a number of people were either afraid of this new animal, this new WTO trade liberalization, but at the same time understanding that we had a very powerful organization that had the potential to make a significant contribution to development. And that there was a need at that time to create an organization that would provide a space for civil society, for academia, for the private sector, for governments. To sit around the same table and explore some of the issues at hand. So that's how this International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development was created. I was part of the team that created it in '94, and it's very much what it's trying to do. It's combining. It's something between a global think tank with at the same time an organization that tries to facilitate an open dialogue at the interface between trade and sustainable development.
Christophe, thanks for the introduction. Speaking of the WTO, what's happening to the round now?
Well, the round is now in serious difficulties. I think at the end of last year there was hope that the round could be concluded this year. I think negotiators have now realized that positions are too far apart, particularly on issues related to industrial goods, but also agriculture and other areas. And, we all know the tensions are essentially between the US and a number of developed countries. And on the other hand, I would say a key kind of rapidly growing emerging economies, being India, Brazil, China. And it seems that on many of the, these fundamental issues, positions are very difficult to reconcile. So a few weeks ago, WTO members in a way implicitly acknowledged.
Is that right?
We won't be able to conclude the round this year. A number of people are starting of talking about Plan B.
Yes, Plan B.
Plan B. What if Plan A doesn't work? What do we do? are there elements
Yes.
of this big package that we can rescue?
Exactly.
Particularly for the least developed countries.
Yeah. Sort of minimalist
A kind
package.
of minimalist package. Some people talked or used to talk about an early harvest.
Yes, yes.
While we continue the negotiations, I think members have not given up
Yes,
on the
yes.
idea
Okay.
that maybe
Okay.
sometimes later
Yes,
on
yeah, yeah.
we could have a bigger agreement. But for the time being, let's concentrate on a smaller package
Yeah,
for least developed countries to be agreed in the ministerial meeting in December.
In December. Speaking of LDC, speaking of a minimalist package, I would say one of the things that I feel that since the launch of at the last ministerial meeting in Hong Kong, when the minister have launched this Aid for Trade initiative, which is aiming on how to help least developed country, developing country to be able to produce better, to be more competitive, to meet all the norm, international norm. So that is something that is, I think, is catching a lot of good wind, I must say.
Yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. I think we're now 5-6 years
Yes.
down the line. Lots of people were quite skeptics at the beginning.
Yes.
Let's be honest. Saying, well, this is a new concept, but
Yes.
basically trying to do business as usual with a different name.
Yes.
It will just take resources away from other sectors. And if you look at the figures, if you look at the reality,
Yeah.
you have to recognize that there has been additional
Yes,
resources.
yes.
There has been a commitment by the donors. There is some momentum
Yes.
around this initiative. Now we have to show that it's effective.
Yes.
And that the money that has been put by the donors is being, having an impact,
Yes.
particularly on development.
And that's why I'm glad that we have worked together to organize this workshop that we did at Naga Hotel, where I was very happy to have many of people from the government, private sector, academia, the real actor, right? And my view is that the feedback that I has is quite positive, right? But perhaps you can give a bit of context why they need to have this monitoring of this aid effectiveness, particularly in the context of this global Aid for Trade review in July in Geneva.
Well, I think that generally developing countries are very keen to understand what works, what doesn't work. There has been additional resources to deal with issues such as adjustment to trade liberalization, overcoming supply side
Yes,
constraints, all the problems that many of the LDCs are facing. Now, is it working? Is it working? I think it's a very legitimate question. The WTO and the OECD are doing something of this monitoring, but they do it essentially at the global level,
Yes.
at the international level.
Yes.
There is a need to understand also what is happening in the countries,
Yeah.
And particularly in LDCs. And for this, the WTO or the OECD are not necessarily well equipped
Yes,
to do
yes.
that. This work has to be done by independent thinkers,
Exactly.
actors
Exactly.
in the countries themselves.
Yes.
Looking at principles such as additionality, ownership, alignment, all the concepts
In the Paris Declaration.
in the Paris
Yes,
Declaration.
yes,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And this work, I think it's very important that it's undertaken locally
Yes.
by local experts.
Yeah.
In collaboration with the governments, with the private sector,
Yeah,
with all the type of people that
Yes.
you mentioned attended this meeting at
Yeah.
at Naga Hotel.
Yes.
And we as ICTSD are very happy and proud that you have been kind enough to help us in this.
Well, I
doing
think
this exercise.
for us it's very important because I still say that Cambodia, as the first LDC who have joined the WTO through negotiation, and we entered in 2004, now we're in 2011, so grosso modo 5, 6, 7 years. It's good timing, It sort of coincide with the launch of the Aid for Trade initiative in Hong Kong. But it's good to see what really happened. I mean, have we seen tangible, concrete result arising from this injection of aid for trade into the country? And to me, the fact that we have picked on the rice sector to exemplify this survey, people can relate to it. Because sometimes, you know, as you know, I mean, the aid for trade sometimes is so macro that most people cannot relate that it's for trade. It's infrastructure, it's everything else, but for the normal people, where is trade? You know, so perhaps you could illustrate a bit, you know, what is your perception when you read the Cambodian report, you know, on the aid flow, the effectiveness. How are we doing? As an independent outsider, you know, looking at that in Cambodia, you know, but in the context of the background of the WTO, OECD, what is your judgment, your plus, your minus, whatever?
Well,
how are we doing?
You know, it's interesting. Your question is interesting because we're trying to do a similar analysis in a number of different countries, and you know, we're still doing the analysis, but we're starting to see a few conclusions coming out. And you know, on the positive side, I have to say that Cambodia is probably one of the LDCs. I mean, if we're looking at LDCs that are facing, you know, specific constraints and difficulties, it's one LDCs that seems to be doing fairly well. At least on at the political level.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned rice. I think rice is a good example because of the rice policy that we have in Cambodia.
Because the policy here.
There's a policy. There's a policy. You know, the future will tell us whether the policy will work or will not work.
Exactly.
But having a policy is the first step.
Yes.
In many other countries, you don't even have the policy. You don't even have the vision.
Yes.
You don't even have a framework.
Yes.
That donors can then come in and try to support.
Yes.
A particular approach that goes in a particular direction. So I think that's probably the positive. It was something that is quite positive in the case of Cambodia. There seems to me that there is a vision, that there is a willingness to move forward, and the government is in the driver's seat. It's not the donors.
That is something that we are quite proud of. But from looking now more from the perspective of the donor, how are they faring in that? I mean, when you look at the aid for trade flow in Cambodia, you know, where are they in the alignment? Where are they in the coherence?
Well, one of the things that we found, maybe on the downside.
It's good to know the downside. Huh?
Yes, it's good to know as well. Seems to be a lack of coordination, coherence among the donors. In Cambodia, and I say that. Because it strikes me as being particularly a problem in Cambodia, less maybe in other countries that we have surveyed. But in Cambodia, I think this issue came up again and again. You can talk to a number of people, even the donors themselves recognize it. They would like to know what is happening. They would like more transparency. And I think this is going to be a major challenge in the future. If we have different donors that duplicate activities, that do the same things at the same time, it's a waste of resources. It's a waste of time.
Any other country that are doing well on donor coordination that you know of? Well, why?
A country that is doing well in almost all areas, among the ones that we have surveyed, is Mauritius.
Mauritius, but Mauritius is quite advanced economy, no?
But exactly, Mauritius is quite an advanced economy. I think it's still a useful case to look at because this is maybe where we might want to be.
Exactly. It's good benchmarking.
It's good benchmarking, and I think what is special with Mauritius is also this thing that I was mentioning before. there is a very clear vision from the government.
Yes.
And well, in the case of Mauritius, it's not even the government. To be honest, it's the private sector.
It's the private
that
sector.
seems to be in the driver's seat.
Wow.
And the government supporting the private sector.
Yeah.
We're looking at the sugar reform in the case of Mauritius. And we know that this is a sector
Yes.
which has gone through very painful adjustments.
I see.
But
From the erosion trade preference?
because of the erosion of trade preferences, basically, Mauritius cannot rely on exports of sugar anymore. And as a small island, it's very difficult. I mean, there are not that many options.
Okay.
Sugar is employing a lot of people. They have developed a brilliant strategy to diversify their economies within the sugar sector, outside of the sugar sector, moving to services, and all this led by the private sector. And then the government coordinates. You know, the government has to put some resources. The private sector has to put some resources. And for some activities that they have identified, then they're asking the donors to come in. But with a very strong leadership on the government side, where they really direct and say, well, you know, the donors should contribute to this particular aspect of the policy.
I see.
And this works.
So the sort of like the success criteria is not just the ownership by the government, by the actor themselves, which is the private sector. And is that what you say in the case of Mauritius? I can feel in Cambodia now that in the last several years we have our private sector is getting more and more audacious, much more organized than before. In fact, we have recently in the last 4 or 5 months the creation of a federation of SME association. These are a group of young entrepreneurs, I mean, who climb from the rank, right? You know, make the money, make their base, and now they are learning the way of trading internationally. And I think it's important because, again, it's a mindset, it's a paradigm shift, it's the exposure to the way of doing business. You know, so I see them are very active, not just in the rice sector. And I can tell you, the rice sector is moving. It's because the private sector see, we have a policy, the government is behind it. Now we can take the money from our pocket, we're going to invest because we know that whatever we do, we will have the support, right? But in other sector, in agricultural sector, for example, in other crop, in cassava, in corn, in cashew nut, for example. But there again, I think we cannot help but to say the success of aid for trade, in this case in Cambodia, but as much as the case in other country, it has to be a tripartite partnership. Government set the policy, private sector, the actor moving, but you cannot not have the technical agency, being the UN agency, being the World Bank, whatever, who can provide either direct technical assistance, like for example UNIDO, helping us establish a laboratory for our rubber certification, for example, right? You know, it's clear that we need that. Or through some sort of programming, you know, from the World Bank to help on trade facilitation, or through loans that we can borrow to invest into custom automation, for example, as Sekuda. So to me, aid for trade is a big animal, but you have to break down sector by sector, actor by actor, and how you can bring the synergy among all these actors together. And that's probably what Cambodia is trying to do right now. Yeah. So anyway, what is your take on the study in Cambodia, particularly in the context of the rice and the feedback that you get from the participant?
Well, I think that there seems to be clearly a very strong interest in the rice sector. I felt a lot of expectations, very high expectations. On the side of many of the people who attended the meeting. I think internationally, the case of Cambodia, and particularly the rice policy, can be quite interesting. In fact, one of the byproducts of this study exercise that we're doing has been a short paper explaining the rice policy in the case of Cambodia, which was sent to the WTO and OECD and others as a background for the Aid for Trade review that is taking place in June, July. And to be honest, it's becoming a bestseller. In the sense that you know, it seems to be a case where there is either already success or there might be success. It comes from an LDC. You mentioned that the first LDC who exceeded the WTO, who's had very difficult situations for a number of years, is trying to overcome that. So the WTO Secretariat has approached us, asking if they could use this as part of their trade policy review of Cambodia. They've referred to the studies in a number of occasions. It's on the website. It's everywhere. People at a very high level are referring to it. So I think it's an interesting experience. To see that this rice policy, which is still in the making, or which is still, well, there is a review that is scheduled. Soon.
Interesting enough, that show how much ownership this government is serious about. That not even a year into it, we are 2 months away from August when we launched the rice policy last year. Already, the government is forming a task force. And I have the honor and the pleasure to be appointed as advisor to the task force to have strategic review on what happened in the last 10 months leading to the annual, the birthday of the rice policy. But critically to look, what is the shortcoming, what we could have done. In other words, I was suggesting that, all the methodology that we have done at the national level in terms of aid effectiveness, right? All these parameters, we're going to use this to apply at the sector level, and we hope that from this critical analysis of our success as well as our shortcoming, we could come up with a clear sort of like policy recommendation to His Excellency like Prime Minister, because every year we have what we call government-private sector forum, where the decision made at that forum, with the private sector present, with the donor, with everybody there, is considered as a cabinet decision. And we hope that from the recommendation of the task force, we could come up with say, look, we are doing good on this one, but we are short of this measure. We need to change this policy. We need to introduce this. We need to put more force on this. Please help decide, and we hope to have that decision, and it will be the strategic review will be done in a couple of months. The private sector, government private sector forum will be held toward November, and it's an event that it's live on television, so everybody will see there and then. So that's something that I would attest that, we are taking this seriously, and like I say, there is no guarantee, that we will succeed in its entirety. But, it's nice to, if you aim for high, you end up medium, and then you push again, and, so you keep moving the mark. And at one point, and that's the goal of the government, is that in 2015, we want to have 1 million tons of rice export. That's equivalent of about, at average about $500 per ton, right? So you're talking about a yearly $500 million, that is staying in the local Cambodian economy, filtered down all the way down to the farmer at the farmer's level. And here I'm talking about 500 million in the farming community, reaching the population that live below poverty line. And that's what I call you know, poverty reduction at its best. And that's why rice is so important for us. Anyway, Christophe, unfortunately, 30 minutes so fast. We're coming to the end of the program. You got to run to the airport, so I'm not going to let your wife yell and scream she couldn't find you at the airport. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and share, not just with me, but for the Cambodian audience, you know, about our experience on aid effectiveness and particularly on the story of rice. So once again, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, time's running out. I hope you can enjoy a bit about this conversation, but also learn a bit what worked, what didn't work in terms of aid mobilization and aid effectiveness in this country, and also a bit about the success or the storyline of the Cambodian rice in the global scene. So I hope to see you again next week. Yeah, so good night.